Hello and welcome to the 150th episode of Trustees and Presidents. I'm Karen Weaver. Today we're diving into a topic that is at the center of the storm in college athletics: change. Why is it so challenging for college athletics to adapt to this new era of likely revenue sharing, name, image, and likeness, and its evolving role in campus life? Change has become the defining word for both higher education and college sports, and navigating it successfully requires innovative thinking and strategic leadership. My guest today, Dr. Julie Wollman, President Emerita of Widener University, brings a wealth of experience and fresh insights into this conversation. She is a nationally recognized innovator in higher education strategy, and she has spent her career leading change. During her presidency at Widener, she developed a forward-thinking approach to strategy that embraced scenarios and possibilities, focusing on strategic direction rather than outdated tactical plans. What a concept. A method now recognized as an emerging best practice. Most importantly, Dr. Wollman is my colleague at the University of Pennsylvania, where she is a professor of practice, and I enjoy working with her. As we explore how to embrace resistance, manage friction, and fuel progress, I'll also share some lessons from my own experiences leading strategic planning for athletic departments. This discussion will challenge us to rethink what qualities we should seek in leaders tasked with guiding our institutions and college athletics throughout this era of accelerated change. Julie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Karen. It's great to be here and on number 150.
Yes, that's a milestone. That's an important milestone. Absolutely. So at Penn, you talk a lot about change. You've talked a lot about change in your two presidencies. Give us an overview of how you anchor your practice in change management.
So it starts with understanding why people resist change and thinking about their competing commitments, what's holding them back, what they're afraid of, because it's natural to fear change. We are very comfortable with what we know. And so we begin there thinking about, or a leader really needs to begin there thinking about, how can I help people get past their fears, past their competing commitments, understand that they have more to gain than to lose in the change process. I think another key factor is transparency about why change is needed. So I think often people are afraid to talk about all of the challenges we're facing and to share that. But our constituents know there are challenges. I think we're better off sharing the data, sharing the challenges, and helping them feel like they can be part of the solutions. They're aware of challenges. They often see things in a way that we may not even anticipate. They really understand the challenges more than we recognize. So I'd say transparency and then really understanding the resistance to change and how we can overcome it are two fundamental ways to start.
Okay, so let's start with part one, resistance to change. I can't imagine how many meetings you walked into with the Faculty Senate and other folks on your campuses talking about the need for change. How did you convey that sense of urgency to the group sitting in front of you?
So, first of all, it has to be grounded in a good relationship already with those on your campus. So I think a respect for shared governance, a respect for the faculty and the staff. And certainly as we talk about athletics, we're talking about staff generally, so that there is trust built and there's a sense that what's going to be shared is accurate, transparent, authentic. And again, I think it's about sharing data all the time so that people understand, look, this is where enrollment is. This is where finances are. This is what our challenges are. This is how it fits into the larger national and regional context in some cases. So, we're not alone, but we're a great place. Here's what we do really, really well. Now we need to get over this challenge to continue to do that really, really well. And we have all these brilliant minds in the room. Let's work together to figure this out.
How do you tie it into the national dialogue and also the fears that people hear, the rumors that people hear? How do you try to manage that as well as just deal with the facts?
Right. So, I mean, part of that is you're thinking about the competing commitments, the fear that people have. So, if we make a change, does that mean I lose my job? Does that mean I don't sit at the table anymore? Does that mean I won't have the same relationships I have working with people? So, there's understanding that and reassuring people that they're going to have an important voice. Thinking about the national dialogue, yes, of course, because people are hearing about institutions closing or merging, which generally is not a merger, but an acquisition. Merger is the nice term that people use, but it's generally an acquisition. And people lose jobs in those situations, even when the goal is to retain as many jobs as possible. And of course, in terms of athletics, there's a lot of conversation about eliminating teams that aren't bringing in money. And of course, with NIL and the uncertainties about and the increasing movement across athletic conferences and the transfer portal, there's just so many unknowns right now that I think we have to directly address it and say, we're trying to get ahead of these problems. So we're not getting ready to eliminate any sports. We're not in a place where we're going to. But my job as your leader is to make sure we don't get anywhere near any of those things. So we're staying ahead of it, and you can help us to stay ahead of it. And we won't be part of that, the news story about the bad thing that happened. We're not going to do that. We're here together to avoid that and to get ahead of it and to be that positive news story about the school that was successful.
So, how do you, as a leader, prepare yourself for that conversation? Let's talk about athletics, because so many presidents don't know a whole lot other than a basic, 30,000-foot level. But you actually, at Widener, took the lead in making the change in the MAC conference in terms of strategy and change. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, again, I think it is incredibly important for presidents to understand athletics deeply, in part because it's an area where we're signing off every year on what's happening there. And that should not be a rubber stamp. And of course, we know that when there's compliance issues, many problems arise, and we've seen that, of course, typically with Division I schools, but not only with Division I schools. So it's very important to understand that. I think there's an expectation that presidents care about their athletic teams and that they are engaged with them. And honestly, athletics is a really important enrollment driver, especially, not so much for the most elite or the Division I schools, but certainly for our D2 and D3 schools. And even in D1, I think students want to go to a place often with vibrant athletics. It makes a difference. They want to be able to go to the game or the match or the meet or whatever on the weekends and feel like they have a winning team and there's a lot of spirits. It's really central to our financial stability. And I think it's honestly foolish not to really to be engaged and understand. But as you said, I had the privilege to be part of the executive committee of our board in the MAC, and which it actually is at the time was the largest Division III conference. I don't know if that is the case now. Again, there's so much moving around within the conference, but within conferences generally. And so when it came time to think about a new strategic plan, there was a question about, well, who's going to lead this? I was like, well, I'll try this. I'm interested in trying this with our athletic conference because I had just done this with our with Widener University, where we had a process that involved a strategy core team, a team of people from across the university, very representative of different areas. And we spent months really doing some creative thinking, looking at data, and then really doing some creative thinking, getting ourselves out of this box of, well, this is the way we do it. So strategic planning is just how do we do the same thing a little bit better? That doesn't work anymore in this environment of constant change. And so, doing a lot of design thinking, a lot of creative thinking activities, bringing this group, it was a commitment. They had to be together and meet every 2 weeks on a Friday morning, and they were committed to doing that. And it was fun because we were doing a lot of creative thinking. It was really interesting. People were able to sort of imagine and dream and got better at that as we went along. So I very carefully planned the activities and to engage people in the kind of design thinking and creative thinking that we wanted to do. And as we built new ideas, there was even more excitement. And then periodically we would bring some of these ideas out to everyone on campus so that everyone was engaged and knew what was going on. But it's extremely difficult to move strategy process forward with a very, very large group and with a group of people who are all trying to just hold on to their turf, the way things are. So the idea was, we're not holding on to turf here. We're open to change and to really rethinking. So when I offered to lead this for our athletic conference, I thought, well, let's try some of the same things. Let's get this small group that's working on it and we did include members of the board, but also students in the group. And that was exceptionally important. Also, some of our, athletic leaders and athletic staff. So it was the various constituents, starting to think about, okay, if we could dream, like what would be some of the things we were doing in the conference that would make us much better and different, that would be differentiators, and that students really wanted, that they felt would be a value added. Yes, they want to play or compete. They want to win. They want to, have opportunities to be part of a vibrant team because that's exceptionally important to their experience in college. But they also recognized other possibilities for the conference that the board didn't always think about. The presidents didn't always think about. The presidents, like anyone else, this is one of many, many things we're concerned about. If everything's going okay and the teams are doing well and some of them are getting to the playoffs and okay, we're good, and they're bringing in the enrollment, they're meeting their enrollment target,
right,
all good. So we didn't this was a chance actually with this strategy thinking to step back and think about what else could we do that would make all of our institutions more attractive, because students would be saying, I want to go to that conference. That's where I want to compete, because they not only have a great team, but they also have some other things that are really important to me. So with this small group, as we had it at my university, we really did a lot of creative thinking about what matters, what would we want, what would, if we could dream that the conference would do things, what are things that have happened or that they've talked about and they've seen in other conferences. And building on that, we moved to something that we did at Widener that worked really well, which is we developed scenarios. And we made small teams of people who were interested in writing the scenarios that built on what students told us really mattered to them in addition to the competition. And I'll give you an example of some of those things. So students wanted to do activities and projects across the conference. They wanted more interaction with student athletes at other campuses, not just at competition, but doing projects that would make a difference in the world, whether it was a community engagement project or leadership development or whatever. They wanted to do more together outside of athletic competition. They felt like there were opportunities to get to know their peers across the conference. We really never thought about that. We thought, we think about doing that on our own campus, right? We have community engagement opportunities, we have leadership opportunities, but we never thought that the students would be that driven to do this across the whole conference and that they wanted to get together regularly across the conference. Not for competition, of course they did want to get together, but also for other activities where they could get to know each other and do things collaboratively and as a collective. They were also, not surprisingly, deeply interested in more work on physical and mental wellness. And we often think about, well, mental health, we know that's an issue. They wanted that, but they also wanted more attention to physical wellness, to nutrition, to taking care of their bodies in a way beyond, like really learning more than just having what was needed done with them. So yes, they'd have their great trainers, they'd have all the other support, but they wanted to learn more and they wanted to do that together. They wanted opportunities to grow, and they really wanted cross-conference leadership opportunities. They felt like that was really value added that would help them, because most of them are not going to continue as athletes after they graduate from a Division III school. They may certainly continue to compete in teams and activities, but not in professional competition. But they wanted to be leaders in whatever jobs they achieved, and they knew that would help them when they came out, as an addition to what they were doing in their majors and minors and activities on their campuses. So knowing that, we developed a couple scenarios of what the future could look like for the conference. And one of them was, and they're stories, they're narratives. Narrative engages people and helps them see the way things could be. So these scenarios are written as narratives and they're realistic. So they have to incorporate aspects of things that we know. So using the schools that are in the conference, recognizing the geography of the conference, naming some of the people that are familiar in the conference, the names of the current athletic director or the leader of the conference are, part of it. And so they seem very realistic, but they describe a situation where, the conference is the top one for leadership opportunities. And there's all kinds of opportunities. And the way that story was told by the group that wrote that scenario was visiting a family where they're trying to recruit, and how they spoke to the potential athlete and how they spoke to the mother of the potential athlete who was worried about sending her child that far away to college. And just really through this conversation, laying out all the opportunities that now, 10 years from now, we were looking 10 years out, what would the conference look like? We did the same thing with the idea of these collaborative joint activities. We had another scenario that looked at that, and then one that looked at a real focus on wellness and nutrition. And in the end, so we have 3 scenarios. In the end, we're going to narrow down to one focus that we want to use, but we could take these out then to all of the student athletes and all of the athletic staff, coaches, assistant coaches, FARs, assistant athletic directors, everyone. We had a number of town halls or joint meetings. We did them on a Sunday each time because that's when students were most of it. We asked them what would be the best time. For a couple of us, we were doing a lot of Sunday meetings and a lot of input on, what do you think about this scenario? What do you think about these ideas? Students would say, like, I like this, I like that, I don't understand, like, this isn't important. So with all that input pulled together, we were then able to refine to a vision, a strategic vision that we could see through this narrative that we were able to put together. So that's really the process. Everyone was involved, but not you sort of work on this. You've got to do some work on imagination and creativity to come up with these scenarios. But then once they're developed, you get the small group that's really been led through how to do that. Once they're developed, you can bring them out to everyone and get the response. And they were very engaging because they are stories that are fun to read and kind of they're familiar with familiar names and places, but there's something really new.
So you did that on your campus. Then how does that work on all the other campuses in the conference? Do they have...
yeah.
Good.
Yeah, so that's what I was sort of describing was these meetings, the meetings on Sunday. Those were conference meetings. So I think I made a shift as I was talking there. Sorry,
gotcha.
It wasn't clear, but so that's what we did that on our campus. But then moved to the athletic, these concerns, having this group of core team of athletic staff, the presidents, the board members who were involved in the strategy, and then some of the students. And we built those scenarios, and then we brought them out to all of the campuses. So when we had those Sunday meetings, they were for students across the conference.
Wow.
And it was surprising how many, how many, how often can you get students to join a meeting anyway that they don't have to come to? And that, was on a Sunday late morning. That was the time they chose. Athletic staff also.
Yeah.
We did separate meetings for students and staff. So because their interests are different. And we didn't want the students' voices to be tamped down in any way by the staff, especially their own coaches. If they're saying like, wow, I really like this kind of opportunity and we don't have it. It's uncomfortable when that is also something I did on my own campus when we did these groups. We didn't have supervisors in the groups when people were responding to the scenarios. But yeah, that's what we did. We did it across the conference. Everyone was invited. We got for each, and there were several meetings and they were for different groups, but we would get, 75 students in a focus group, which is amazing. We did it by Zoom because they're all over the place on Sunday mornings, and it worked really well. We got some great feedback. We took a lot of notes, and then we were able to go back to the group and refine and refine a strategy that incorporated the best of each of them and what really resonated for everyone involved.
So how did you manage the room in terms of the power positions on a team? Are the coach, the assistant coach, that type of thing? Were those folks in the room or not?
We actually they weren't there with the students.
Okay.
They were, in this small strategy team, it was a mix of people. So we had some coaches, we had some ADs, we had a couple of presidents, and we had students. And I make it clear from the beginning with these, a great question, because I did this on my campus as well. In this space, we are all equals. We are all equals. Everyone's voice is equal. You are making that commitment if you want to be part of this group. And that it works. I mean, people respect that. Obviously, you pick people for these groups that are going to be open to that and open to creative thinking. When we did the focus groups on campus, as I said, no supervisors in the same groups responding to the scenarios. So it would be just staff, then we'd have the more senior people, we'd have students, we'd have faculty separate from staff because sometimes there were issues there. So it's really to allow people to speak openly. When we did it with the athletic conference, it was students were one set, so we had a set of meetings for them. And then the coaches and FARs were another. And then the athletic directors were another group. And we also included if their supervisors were somebody other than a president. We put those into the group with the athletic directors. Wow. They work so closely together. But so some vice presidents there. Yeah. So you're absolutely right, because it is important to get honest feedback and to avoid that power dynamic, really, to have those groups separately. So there were a lot of, it's a commitment to a lot of meetings, and yet it was really worth it to help us get the feedback.
It sounds like it. And as I was listening, I kept thinking to myself, this is so different than the way athletic departments in particular, but universities in general, have solved problems. They say, oh, now we got to find $2 million for name, image, and likeness, or $5 million. How do we do that? They identify the problem and they say, go about solving it. You went to the students and said, what would make this a better experience?
Right.
That is remarkable.
Right.
And I'm curious as to how it panned out. What kinds of things did you end up resolving and doing for the conference?
So that is a great question. It was at the end of this process, at the point of leaving, I had announced that I was going to resign from my presidency and come to Penn. And so, because my dream, my lifelong dream was to go back to teaching and writing and research, before my career was over. So I was on my way back to Penn. That I left that with our conference executive director, and there were a number of activities that were planned to bring the students together. But I can't say, I wasn't in that. And, one of the challenges, I think, with all of the turnover in presidents now, so we know now that, the average tenure is under 6 years, which is a significant drop over the past 10 years for a president. And that's average. So we're reading every day in the higher education news about presidents who leave after a year or 2 years. There's not a lot of continuity. It takes a long time to put something in place. And so I think what we end up doing here, and this is really important for our athletic departments, is our athletic directors and the directors of our conferences, whether they're commissioners or executive directors, however that structure is in the conference, they're incredibly important on carrying this work through. And honestly, they're going to be incredibly important anyway, because they're going to be the ones who are planning the activities, who are making this happen. And so they have to have full buy-in to this change process. And that's why it was so important to engage them at every step of the process. And of course, leading this process, I worked so closely with our conference executive director. I mean, we were in conversation multiple times a week about this. And, she was very, very committed. So I think those are the people who are going to carry the work forward, really. And it's really exciting for them if they're interested in any role, including athletic director and conference director, even though there's a lot going on in athletics right now. So we could say, yeah, we don't need anything new, but it can get routine in some ways. And it's really exciting to be able to be part of doing something that's new and different and that our student athletes are really excited about and gain a lot from. And that when you're recruiting, and this was our vision, students are saying, yes, I want to play for that conference because they have these opportunities that no other conference does.
Yeah, that's something I hear a lot about in the Division One space. When schools look to transfer conferences, change conferences, they often talk a really good game. Well, particularly at school conferences like the Big Ten. Oh, they have the Big Ten Academic Alliance. Oh, they have all this research. But what do they do for the athletes? And I think that's what you all have targeted, is saying, then we're going to go listen to the athletes to make their experience better.
Right.
As we begin to wind down the conversation, what advice do you have for campus and university leaders about trying to do something like this kind of management on campus?
Yeah, I think it's about listening to the constituents. And we're going back to the resistance and the friction that gets in the way of change, is that we come down from on high with these ideas about what should change without asking the people who probably know better about what needs to change, because they're doing it. They're doing the work day to day. They're on the front lines. They see where the points of friction are. They see what could relieve those points of friction. They see what our students and faculty and staff are really asking for, but we often don't ask them. And when we don't ask them, and we bring these new ideas forward, or basically no new ideas, and just say we're going to do the same thing but do it a little better, which is the typical strategic planning, they're the ones who are going to have to implement these new ideas. If they're not on board, it's not going to work. You're going to have the traditional strategic plan that gets put on a shelf because we said we did the process, we made a strategic plan, put it on a shelf, collect dust, as people say, and nothing happens because people have not bought into it and they don't see how it's going to happen, what's going to change. One of the things that we did at Widener, and this would be the same thing with sort of handing this now to, in the conference to athletic directors, is after the strategy was developed and there was buy-in and we all agreed on it, was we created a group that was really the implementer group that would be able to think about what would be some things we could change or do that would be aligned with our strategy, that would move us forward. And those were more sort of the mid-level manager people, and some a little bit more senior, and students, because in a campus setting, one of the most interesting things, and this is like asking the athletes what would make it better, students will tell you things that nobody knows, because if there's a glitch in how you register and we wonder why do these students pick courses but they put them in their cart but then don't register for them, what's going on here? They just don't follow through. Well, Students can tell you why that problem happens. And you can fix it very easily. But nobody in the registrar's office or in the senior leadership or anyone else, frankly, ever tries to register and runs into this problem.
Right.
Only students know this problem. And so if we're not asking the user, I mean, I think about the user experience. That's really what we're trying to improve on our campuses, the user experience, the small experience of registering for a class or getting the assistance you need as an athlete with tutoring or training or whatever it might be. And the big things that you need, like I need to know that I'm developing something beyond just my athletic skills to be successful beyond this, this experience here in college. We don't really know what the problems are and what people are looking for until we ask them. We do a lot of guessing, and then we wonder why nothing changes when we implement a strategy that's developed just by the senior leadership. The senior leadership, as much as we try to spend time with our students and engage with them and go to their athletic competitions, etc., we are as far from them as possible, really, in terms of what their day-to-day experience is like. We've got to ask them. We've got to ask our constituents. It's the same thing with faculty, right? I mean, you go from being the president of a university back to, because I started my career as a tenured full professor, so as a faculty member, back to the faculty, and you're like, wow, I didn't realize how hard this thing was to do, or now I understand why the faculty complained about it. And so you just don't know if you don't ask the person who's involved, who's trying to do it, and you don't know what their dreams and hopes are to make it better.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I have seen consistently over my 30 plus years in athletics was the answer was always more money, right? That's what will fix everything, was more money. And what you're saying is no, it may not be more money. It may be a reframing of their experience. Right. And I would think a lot of presidents and athletic directors would be chomping at the bit to try to understand that, because for most places there is no more money.
It's such a good point. And that's true in athletics, and it's true generally in higher education. Often when I'm talking with my classes about leading change, like what we need to think about changes we can make that aren't going to cost any more money. We're going to have to reallocate in some cases, but there is so much we can do to make the experience better for our students, our faculty, and our staff, by just changing the processes that we use, by eliminating processes that don't work, but they're the way we've always done it, which is, very problematic issue, without any additional cost. In fact, you may save money eliminating certain processes and then have more resources to do something else that's more meaningful and more impactful. One of the things I like to say is, why do we make it so hard? We seem to have a commitment in higher education, not intentionally, but because of our processes being so opaque for students and faculty and staff, we really make it hard without intending to, but we make it hard to do almost anything. And, this is where we, think about a student athlete who's not happy with their major.
Yeah.
It is so difficult to change your major on most of our campuses. And, you need this approval and that approval, and you have to go talk to this person and go talk to that person, and you need a certain GPA. Well, sometimes what we find is students' GPA in the major they want to change to is great. Their overall GPA isn't as great, because they don't do well in the courses in what their current major is. They don't like it. They chose the wrong major. They didn't know. And yet we make it so hard to make a change. And then we often will lose those students.
Yeah.
Or, the student athlete says, it's easier for me to go into a transfer portal and go somewhere else and have a different major than just stay here, because they make it so hard.
Yeah.
So, that's part of our strategy, I think, is how do we improve the user experience so the quality of what we're doing overall is better and we're not getting stuck with these little glitches along the way that just suck the energy out of everyone and are discouraging rather than encouraging and create excitement and fuel.
Julie, you've brought up so many good points. And one thing I'd like to say as a value add to this whole discussion is that if the students are happy, they'll tell a lot of people, right? And that enhances your conversation about your campus, about their experience. And they're the best customers we have, right?
They are. They're our best recruiters. They're, yes, absolutely. And I mean, we don't realize how much they're on social media saying things.
Yes, all kinds of things, TikTok, whatever. This has been a fantastic discussion. I'm really hoping that the presidents and senior leaders who listen to this podcast will take an opportunity to try something different and involve the students in their voices. I think that's really important.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
It was such a pleasure, and I feel like we could talk forever about this, but it's fun, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you.
Good to talk.